So tonight we're going to be talking about injecting engaging practices on the fly, some kind of fun maybe teaching methods that we use in our classroom to get us energized and ready for the start of school. And maybe there are ones that you've used before, or maybe that they're ones that you've heard about and want to try. But usually I have to hear something described to me like 10 times before I actually retain it and remember to use it. So no idea, even if it's one you've been using for a long time and you think others use, feel free to share it tonight when we get into that. But I'll be our host for tonight, and my name is Sarah Volk, and I'm the president-elect of the North Dakota Council for Teachers of Mathematics, and I thank everybody for joining us tonight. Especially this, week or two before school starts. I hope you're all ready to go. When I see this graphic, I just laugh because I feel like this is how I spend a good majority of my summer vacation, getting ready for school to start, procrastinating lots of Netflix and looking for bulletin board ideas on Pinterest, and of course naps, because you have to get in naps. When else are you going to do it? But if we just want to go around quick and do some introductions, just so that everybody knows who everybody else is.
I can start. Hi, I'm Kathy Williams, and I work with Sarah as the president of NDCTM.
I'm Heather. I work with Sarah at Fargo Public Schools, but I'm at South High teaching math 9 to 12. I have Algebra 1 and Algebra 2.
And I'm Jen Goodman, and I'm in Velva, and I'm the webmaster on the board.
I'm Darcy Backegard, joining in mostly just to help facilitate.
I guess when I did my introductions, I should have also mentioned that I teach up at Fargo North. I teach Algebra 2 and AP Calculus, so you might see some of those examples as we're talking today. So again, our talk today is on injecting, engaging, teaching methods, and I know that we all know that they're important and when we would use them, but I was trying to think of when I find them to be most timely or helpful. And I was thinking, well, I think we often use them for review days, especially when you know that the review or maybe half your class will finish the activity immediately and you want to have something where all the students are engaged for the full class period. I'm really guilty of bullet number 2, where you've already maybe lectured, done seat work, or some other repeated routine for at least the past 4 days, and you maybe by Friday can't even listen to yourself do another math lecture. That maybe that's a sign that you're ready for something else. But then I was also thinking, well, sometimes your students are in standardized testing all morning and it's hard to wrangle them and get them engaged in what you're doing. Or even, that I was thinking the beginning of school, the homecoming pep rally, and you're teaching those 2 periods before that, and you still expect them to learn things, much to their surprise that day, that it might be, a good day to mix things up and have something new and fresh for them to do. So today our objective is to discuss some of these engaging practices, and at the end, or maybe even after, depending on how our timing goes, to compile a working list for reference that you can go back to during the school year, just in case you are saying, oh, I love that idea that Jen talked about or Heather talked about. What was that again? I need a mental refresher. Or if your brain's fried and you're like, I just need to look at the list, that you have that handy someplace. So I guess we just want to open it up to the discussion. So what are some fun and engaging practices that you could maybe use to convert a traditional lesson or practice into something new? So I'm trying to think of techniques where you could take something that you already have, and so it wouldn't be like reinventing the wheel. It would maybe be more like investing maybe a half hour to an hour just to get the logistics down, like thinking how you want to group the students or how you want to set up your classroom space, but that you don't have to necessarily ditch materials that you already have or problems that you know are effective, just how you're implementing them in the classroom. And again, hopefully there are ideas that you could, maybe you're a long-term planner and you can think about the week before, or maybe even the day before, the morning of, that you think, oh, I would really like to do something different with this. What's something quick I can think about for that? I thought, just to get in the spirit of it and give you a chance to think in case you didn't bring your own, I thought I could talk about one that I've used before that maybe you've used before, and then give you a chance to maybe mull that over and see if there's something that you would like to share with the group. But one that I use that works pretty well is speed dating, and I consider that to be a large group activity. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that one or not. The type of problems that it works well for are questions that can be answered quickly. It doesn't work as well like for a geometry proof or for a lengthy problem solving. But you could give students a practice or a worksheet that perhaps you already have created and that you've used in the past. And the setup for it is to make 2 concentric circles with the students. The inner circle is facing the outer circle. So each student is facing a partner. You could set a timer for whatever amount of time you think is appropriate to answer the question. And each pair works on a problem and then checks their answers. And then when the timer goes off, one of the circles moves so that the student has a new partner. If you didn't want to reconfigure your classroom space because maybe you want to quickly transition into another activity, you wouldn't have to do the circles. That students could just go from partner to partner. But I found that when I do it this way, that you have to be careful because sometimes students don't move to a new partner, or they just stick with their friends and they don't maybe move around as much as they would with the circles. So I'm not sure if anybody has something that they can think of that they would like to share that is kind of quick and easy like that.
I love the speed dating idea, and especially the concentric circles. I tried speed dating once with adult learners, in 2 lines, and I can see where concentric circles would work really well in the classroom for keeping track of who's partnering with whom. It reminds me of an activity I've used for review where I just take large manila envelopes, and again, this is very low tech, and put a question on the outside of the envelope. And then students have little strips. They're in teams, and so they write Team A on the back of all 8 strips, and then they rotate around the room to these envelopes and write on the strip of paper their solution to the problem that's on the front of the envelope. The nice thing about this activity is it gets them moving, just like your concentric circles. It gets them talking, which is so important. But also it's great for formative assessment because the teacher then at the end of the class period can just dump out an envelope and see at a glance, everybody gets concept A, right? Oh, there's some difficulty with concept B. In a way that you don't really recognize it as quickly, I think, in a worksheet or something.
Do the students move to the envelopes? So like the envelopes are at a certain spot in the class and then they just move around?
So very much like stations. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
What I kind of like about the envelopes is that they're not looking at the other group's work though, because sometimes with the stations, maybe they'll copy down or somebody's written something that's a hint on there. So I do like the idea of the envelopes.
I feel like I should have an activity to share, but my brain is not. My brain is not working.
Well,
It's
we are
okay.
so much in summer brain, right?
Yeah.
We're just so far from it and just trying to start bringing ourselves back. So
Yeah.
Well, I have some more just in case. I was a little worried how many participants we would have. So I'm like, well, I'll come prepared, and then you can see if maybe they're ones that you've used before, or if you've, implemented it a little bit differently than how I did. If you have anything that you'd like to share about it, or maybe talking about some of those will spur an idea of something that you already do. And I just tried to think of everything that maybe I've seen recently or talked to people about. And this is similar to what the envelope idea, just that gallery walk. I like that wording that Kathy used about working with teams. I call it small groups, but I like that word choice of teams. But this one would work for small groups or partners, just to break up a worksheet or a problem set into stations and to post the stations around the classroom, or even a team center space. I like to sometimes, if there's a space outside of the classroom, just to try to get them up and moving, and so they maybe don't always hear all of the other conversations, but then to maybe number the stations or give them character names and assign the students to the stations and have them work through the problems there. There's lots of different variations on that. I think most of us have probably used a gallery walk or stations before. But if a group has already, if there's enough time that there's already student work there, that the next group to look at it could look over that student work to make corrections. You could even make it like an error analysis activity where you can encourage the students to make intentional mistakes for others to catch. You could even differentiate this by making like the odd numbered stations at a lower difficulty level than the evens, and you could group a students by ability, but that I think a lot of us do stations or gallery walk. I don't know if anybody has any variations on that or anything that they want to throw in.
I've never done it where the students actually do the work like at each station. So like you just have it on a big paper and they just actually work it out there and leave it there. So they don't do all of the problems, they just do their assigned stations.
Yeah, I have done it that way. I just get that big rolled paper from the office, and sometimes I don't even type up the problem, that I'll just take like, a magic marker and write the problem on there.
I like that. I think I could use that. I've only done it where they have to, like everybody does all the problems like on a separate sheet of paper, but I like that they're on the wall. And then do you leave them up for a while or like talk about them?
Yeah, it depends on how many times you teach the same class throughout the day, because you maybe
Oh.
wouldn't want the next class to see the answers.
Mm-hmm.
So when you don't have them work it on the wall, do you just like when they're at station 6, they're just working together on question 6 then on their worksheet? Is that how you've done it before?
I guess I just do it where it's randomly around the room and then you don't even have to go to a certain station at a certain time. You just go where you want when you want to. And then if other people happen to be there at the same time, you can work together. But this is more of a, like, I would think you could be more intentional about groups this way, the way that you do it.
When I do something similar, and when I just have a generic piece of paper with like, I've got one with 6 squares on it and one with 10 squares on it, depending on how many. And then I just have a stack run off. And when you're at problem number 6, you work in box number 6. And when you're at problem number 3, you work in box number 3. And then I don't even pay attention when I put out the cards that I've got them on, what goes where. I just know that the work is going in that spot.
I don't know if this would work, but another variation off of this whole gallery walk poster idea, if students were working in teams of 2 or 3 to solve a problem, once they create their solution, this is the theatery person in me, so this might be too out there, but a good, just a differentiated thinking, divergent thinking rather, then one student could stay with their creation, with their problem, and the other students, and kind of then pretend that it's like an art gallery. And we're going to look at the beauty of these equations, and we're going to have people, explain to us the masterpiece that they have solved for each other. And so it could be a little silly. So one student stays with the team's problem so that they can explain it, and the other students then walk around to the other problems, and they're the guests at the art museum. And the students, at some point, you could even have them switch, right? So partner A starts at the poster and is the docent, so to speak, explaining the poster, and then they switch back. So both have to be able to explain it. Both are able to walk around and listen to the explanations of the other posters. So not super quick, but would take it to that next level of them having to really explain, and might just be something different.
Yeah, I like that idea, and then they get to be the expert on their problem, and yeah, I like that. So many different variations. Anybody else have anything that they want to chime in on a gallery walk?
Oh, it's not exactly gallery walk. I do something kind of like that with Algebra 1. and the different types of equations. So point, slope, intercept, yada. Anyway, I call it the traveling salesman, and they have a team and they have to come up with reasons why their version of the equation is the best one. And then the salesman has to go around and try to convince everybody. And the freshmen get a real kick out of, being able to do that. So traveling salesman.
Yeah, I like that idea.
My other one, again, would probably be not quite as fast, but kind of another version of the gallery walk, would be have them physically represent the math rule or the concept, have some sort of physical representation that helps them think through how they got that answer. So not always applicable depending on the type of problem, but forcing them to think about the steps of the problem in a different way, and then working together to physically represent those steps or that rule.
I could also see freshmen being pretty into that. But I think that that's neat. I think at one of our past state conferences there was a ballet team that came, or production that came in and tied that to geometry and the different transformational motion, and that was a neat way to get that physical piece into it too. So that's kind of cool. I guess another activity that I use in the classroom is called hot seat, and so that one is a competitive game, a large group activity. I think you could lay out the classroom in different ways. The way that I've seen it done is to have the desks in rows, and you could have the students like with mini whiteboards seem to work pretty well. And then you put up a problem or a question for the whole class to complete, and then you have them show their answer for correctness. And then one of the spots in the row is the hot seat. I usually pick the person in the front, but you could pick anywhere, or I suppose each time you could do like a random generator and pick which seat in the row is the hot seat. But the person who's in the hot seat can earn 5 points for their row, and each other person in the row can earn 1 point on the question. And then it works best if you have an evenly distributed amount of students in each row. But if there's anybody extra, then you'd want to deem which seat's the seat that doesn't count each time if it's the person in the back of the row. But then you want to make sure that each team is able to get this same amount of points, max points each time. And then after the question, then the students get up and move ahead one seat, and the person in the front moves to the back. So that's more of a competitive review game. And they seem to really get into that. And so for grouping, I probably would either want to randomly assign them to the rows so the teams don't get stacked too heavily. It really depends on the group. I mean, for Algebra 2, sometimes there could be a row that just demolishes the other ones, whereas, in other less diverse classes like Calculus, they're probably a little more evenly distributed. But yeah, I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that one.
I've never used that one before. That sounds like fun. I'm thinking about whether, you would want the student to know that seat number 1 is the hot seat, or if your random idea might even be better. I don't know. In some ways, I hate to throw in any anxiety, right, into math, but it sounds like a fun game to play.
I was going to comment on the random generator too. I didn't really think about the anxiety, but it seems like a good way to make sure everybody was actually trying all the problems, even though they can still get 1 point if they're not the hot seat. If they knew that they might possibly be the hot seat, maybe they would make sure that they worked on the problem.
All right. Another one that I've used before, and this is another large group activity, is to make a set of cards. It's called Quiz Trade, or you don't have to trade. It doesn't sound as catchy with the no trade, but so to make a set of cards with a different problem on it, And it works well for the types of problems that require some kind of an explanation. So even if it's just solving an equation in algebra, they would just need to be able to explain their steps. But each student gets a card and takes time to answer the question before they break out into the activity, possibly making some kind of marking on the back of the card for themselves to be able to remember what their thinking was. And then depending on the difficulty of the topic while students are working, you could circulate to see if there's any questions, because they will be the expert on their question, and sometimes they want that confidence of knowing that they have it right, so when they start to work with someone else, they don't lead anybody else astray. And so after they've completed their problem, students are now standing, and they could find, and then they would partner up and trade cards with their partner, and then the students would work the other person's problem and then check answers with the other. At that point, they could keep their traded cards and move on to a new partner, or they could trade back and remain to be the expert on their card and find a new partner. Again, I've tried the multiple trades, and depending on the activity, it seems like they like to be the expert at that card, or at that one card. And so I had included in the slide deck like an example of it that I used for calculus. I know not everybody in the group teaches calculus, but for AP, there's so much justifying. So just to kind of show an example of that. So it says like this is a graph of a derivative. At which x value does f have a relative max? Justify your answer. So that type of problem where you're looking for a real specific verbal statement, and sometimes students get sick of writing out all of them, so just getting them involved in a verbal activity, this seems to work well with that. I don't know if that's one you've heard of before, or if you have any comments or questions about that one.
So Sarah, if you had a class of 20, would you make 20 cards? Is that how it works?
Yeah, I give them all a different one. Yep.
Have you ever used something like that toward the beginning of a unit, or to see how much they already know, to see where their prior knowledge skill set is, to see just kind of who's already ready? Or is that just way too hard for where you're at?
I haven't tried it at the beginning of the unit before, so I guess I'm not sure how that would go, but I think it could be okay.
So in that case, it wouldn't be that they're already the experts. It's kind of to see how much they know, to see what language they could come up with. And by bouncing ideas off of each other, like what can they figure out about an upcoming concept, and then like build off of their prior knowledge, or like break down their misconceptions of what they think or how they think to solve that problem.
And I suppose if you did it at the beginning of the unit, they maybe wouldn't be an expert on their card, because I think if you had explained it in that way, you're going to get 20 hands in the air going, can you check mine? I don't know how to do this. Whereas you kind of maybe, just say, come up with your best solution. Yeah, be the investigator. And then when you're meeting with the other person, you could see what they think about the problem and see if you arrived at the same conclusion. Yeah, that would be an interesting.
You're the predictor, you're the investigator, like something else. So yeah, it would change how you set up the vocabulary, but might be a different perspective.
I could even see when you talk about proficiency at the beginning of a unit using, that level, like that lower level, or like the course below type questions, just to get them into the topic. That I could see it being useful for that, and showing them that, hey, you do already know something about this topic. So I could see that as a good fit.
When I taught 7th graders, we did a snowball activity at the beginning of our geometry unit. And they loved it because I only have 2 rules in my classroom. My first rule is only I'm allowed to throw things at people. Good rule with 7th graders.
Yeah.
But I would let them, they would write down one thing that they knew about polygons or angles, and I would generally tell each row that they had to have some kind of a topic theme in that row, so I didn't get everybody saying a circle is round. kind of a thing. And then crumple up the piece of paper and throw them around the room at people. And then everybody had to find a snowball. And because they're white, they're paper, so it's snowballs. And then uncrinkle it, look at what the other person had written. Do you agree or disagree with it? Why? You have 2 minutes, analyze and write, crumple it up, throw it around, do it 2 or 3 times, and then everybody had to find your own snowball. And then see what everybody thought. And nobody signed it. Nobody, so that wasn't totally anonymous. And then at the very bottom, they had to analyze whatever anybody had written on there, put their name at the top, and turn it in. And then I looked at those, took 5 minutes just to kind of look, but it gave me a really good idea where people were at.
I bet they loved that.
Yep. It was always a big day. Right after Make a Mess Day with statistics was Snowball Day, where they got to throw stuff at people.
I think that's cool that you could even use it as a way for students to reflect on maybe what they learned that day as well. And just especially the kids that maybe don't like to speak out in class, that writing it down on the piece of paper would be fun, would be less stressful for them too.
Yeah, or like that idea of I do like 3 things you learned today, 2 things that you still have questions on, 1 thing that you could teach someone. And so they could do something like that on the snowball. Like, what are 2 questions that you still have from today's lesson? And just write them down. And then they throw them around and they just keep throwing until everybody's questions are answered. And then they find their snowball back.
I even was thinking like in an algebra class, even low prep on your end, that you could have them write one person writes an equation down and then you crumple it up and then they throw it and the next person has to solve it. And maybe the third person has to check the answer, that you could do it that way too. All fun ideas.
I would probably have assign them different sections so that you got a variety if you're going to do it as a review.
Fun stuff. So this one's more of a seat work, so probably not as up and moving, but to work. I don't know if you've seen a circuit training type of worksheet. And so it doesn't really matter the problem set. You probably want it to be about 20, so maybe 10 problems on the front and back, depending on how time consuming they are. And then the answer to whatever the question is, and maybe you have to narrow down part of the solution, but it really should be a single answer or a single numerical part of the solution is what they'll be looking for. And then after working all the problems yourself, you want to place the answer in one of the boxes, and then this as the students work through it, they work the problem and answer the question that you had, and they get their answer, and then they look somewhere on the worksheet for the answer. I'm not doing a great job of verbally explaining it, but I did take like a screenshot for like a calculus worksheet. And so it doesn't really matter where they start on the worksheet. This would just be an example of 2 problems in a row, but that they would answer the problem and then look for their answers somewhere on the worksheet. So like somewhere, like the answer to one of the questions is -2/5, and the answer to this one is this. And so then they would know that if they saw their answer somewhere on the worksheet, that they would then know that they arrived at a correct solution. And then, like, let's say they did a problem and had the answer a -2/5, then they could choose to do this problem next. It doesn't really matter what order they do the problems in. And so it's just a self-checking worksheet. I don't know. They seem pretty popular, some of the different groups I'm members on social media that for teaching, that people will post those. And so that was an example of a calculus one. I've done them before for in Algebra 2, like with quadratics, like maybe you could even say like, what's the y coordinate of the vertex? And that's the number that they're looking for somewhere else on the worksheet. So again, it's not as big in terms of up and moving, but just a way to take maybe a drill and kill even textbook worksheet and just make it into something else.
And the nice thing there too is, there's that built-in self-check. I've used that even with university students, and they know at the end if they're in the right place or not, right? Because each one should match up.
I've seen people take that worksheet and cut it apart and enlarge it and put it around the room so it does become like a walk around thing. But it's basically just your worksheet, but to get them to walk around.
Well, it's an easy fix to get them up and moving. Hadn't even really thought about that, but good idea. This one I haven't tried out and was new to me, and a colleague, actually our health teacher, was explaining this one to me. I don't know if you've ever done it with Jenga. And so when I was looking for examples of it online to share today, I saw the colored Jenga, but then I've also seen it where instead of colors, there's numbers on the end of the Jenga blocks. And so you could do this like in small groups or stations. And then your worksheet, the questions would correspond to the numbers on the Jenga blocks or the colors, but as students play a block, that then they would answer the question that corresponds to that number or that color on the worksheet. And when I had looked at it online, that depending on the type of problem, I saw some elementary teachers were using it, but they said that you could have whiteboards there for the students to do it, just if you didn't need them to have a final product at the end. It kind of depended on what you needed, but I thought that was just something different that I could see that some of my students would like that. Has anybody used that one before? The one thing that I thought of for that, and I don't want to be negative about any things we share today, it's just if they get knocked over and you've got this classroom full of like 8 Jenga sets, like just spread all over the place, and you pick it all up at the end and you find a random number 8 sitting someplace and you're like, which set does this go with? But I don't know, I just thought it was kind of fun for something different. Has anybody tried anything like that?
Do Jengas really come like that with colors?
No, you'd have to. Well, I think there are colored Jengas, but I think this one's been painted.
Okay.
I suppose you could just use Sharpies too.
Yeah.
I suppose if you're adventurous, you could get the giant Jenga.
Then it would have to be as a class, because I cannot have 8 giant outdoor Jenga sets on my tables. Oh my goodness.
Absolutely. What could go wrong giving freshmen giant Jenga? I mean, really.
But you would have to label them like set A, so it would be your numbers A, and then all your numbers B, and all your numbers C, so that you would know which Jenga set went in which container or bag.
Yeah. I just thought it could be something fun, just worth a try. I didn't get as in depth with some of the other ones, but I again was just trying to pick my brain. Snowball fight came up there. Have you guys ever heard of doing like a jigsaw? Anybody familiar with that? So I had observed someone taking like an algebra question and solving it, requiring like groups of 4. Requiring 4 different methods for solving the question. I suppose the topic that comes to mind with this would be like maybe solving linear systems, like maybe with a table, a graph, substitution or elimination or whichever, but in each person's required for to solve it using a certain method, and then checking together to see if they got the same solution, but then that they would be the expert then on their method, and then they would move to the next question. And I'm trying to think I haven't done it before, I've just seen it, but just like a jigsaw puzzle, like looking at the 4 different methods. Has anybody heard of anything like that? No.
We spend quite a bit of time in Algebra 1 talking about solving quadratics and all the different ways, so that could work with that one too.
Mm-hmm. What's been popular lately in the last few years is people making scavenger hunts or escape rooms. And I know that those can be really time consuming, but essentially a lot of that just consists of, you know, besides the word puzzles that go along with it, that a lot of it's just traditional practice that students are doing to arrive at the conclusions for those. So maybe not as easy to do the day before, but I was just thinking that that would be kind of a fun thing too. I've purchased online some different like murder mysteries, like whodunit type activities that I think if you wouldn't have to purchase one, but if you found one and practice it enough times, I think you'd be able to make your own pretty quickly. But that's just, again, something kind of different.
For the scavenger hunt, escape room, or even the murder mystery, have you then asked students to create those? You know, like you set up 1 or 2, and so they have this experience and they have that model. At the end of a unit, have you ever had them have to make that experience for each other, and then they have to rotate their escape, their digital breakout or whatever they...
I haven't ever done that, but I could see that as being a really fun project at an end of a unit. I think that would be really neat. Might even be fun at the end of a semester if you did that instead of a final. Like they could even choose a unit from that semester to do it with. Like that could even be a variation on that too.
You could have one class period could do it for another class period, so that they're not, you know, hearing, and the whole class can brainstorm together and you can work through it in period 1, and then period 2 could do it for their test, and period 1 could do period 2's.
Well, and I think they would really enjoy coming up with some of the backstory. That I think that would be really fun. And I think other methods that people probably use pretty commonly are making different kinds of card games with matching or grouping cards into categories. I haven't done it a lot, but I've played a couple of board games. You kind of make your own, sort of like, looks like Candyland a little bit. And I suppose if you wanted to use the same board for multiple units, you wouldn't want to maybe put the problems right on there. But if you had the problems written on the board that they roll a 3, they'd move their token 3, and then they answer the question that's under that space on the board. I was thinking that if you wanted to make it more generic, that you could say draw a card from the yellow pile and it could have a question on it. And so I was thinking you could do a board game. And you kind of maybe could do some research as the topic you're doing, something that you could maybe make into a lab. Is there some evidence student could collect to see the mathematics behind what they're doing? There's a lot of those available out there. For example, in the quadratics unit, I have my students launch rockets using a stomp rocket with PVC pipe, so the air pushes it up in the air, and they take a video of it, and then they use Logger Pro to plot the points to see if it's following gravity, just again, just so that they can see the mathematics in motion. You wouldn't maybe have to, I didn't come up with that, I found it on the internet. And
where does the PVC pipe come in?
Oh, the base is made out of PVC pipe, and it's got a tube, and you put like a gallon water or milk jug on it, and you duct tape it onto a plastic tubing, and then the rocket is on a piece of PVC pipe. You put the rocket on, and then then it's airtight, so when you stomp the rocket, then the air pressure causes it to go up. But if you, and a colleague of mine, because I had built it based on a website that had this, it was a project-based learning website. But my colleague said that they can get them at the hobby shop, that his son has these little stomp rocket things. You wouldn't have to build them from scratch, but.
Yeah, so you're talking about a homemade version, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, that would just be an example of something that you could, see the mathematics in motion so that they can have some context for it. But yeah, and it's some other things that we've talked about, like you could maybe create some error analysis either yourself or have students make some common errors, and you could put them up on the projector, or have something like a proof where the steps are out of order and they could put them into order. I haven't done a lot with foldables, but I know some people really like that, or making different fancy math notebooks with flaps and stuff in them. I know some people like to do that. But I was just trying to think of any idea that came to mind for just something different.
I'm glad that you included the card games, because I think that's one that's pretty easy to do. And you can do it even through Desmos. I'm trying to remember if Shayna talked about that last time. But you can go into Desmos and just make your own little cards, have the kids sort them. And it's kind of nice because then you can project onto the screen their success. And they can kind of see, okay, I've got one set that's right? And I can see that the other group across the room is almost finished, and so on. And that kind of adds to the engagement, and the persistence, I think, a little bit. But I think so many rich conversations come from talking about why these two match, or these, all belong together in a group. And of course, you can determine what the categories are. You can let them.
Yeah, I've never done that with Desmos, but that does sound really fun. I'm definitely going to have to check into that. And the students like to make some card games themselves too. And when my kids do AP review, and I have to require them to show what they've been doing to study, that sometimes they'll share those that they've made too. So that's neat. Anybody have anything that popped into their mind while we were talking? I know everybody shared some great ideas already.
I'm still kind of thinking about those card games, and there's another great website, but now that I've been out of the high school classroom for several years, it's escaping me. But I think, it became popular around the time of the Common Core, where they actually have pre-made card matching. Do you know the site I'm trying to think of, everybody?
Oh, was it like the Mars?
Yeah, that's it. Yep. Thank you.
Yeah. I've used those a few times, especially for statistics that they had. Yeah, they definitely required some deep thought for why you would match things together. So an example I think that was really challenging was where they would have box plots or box and whisker plots that you would match to like a normal curve. And so like how the skewness affects the box plot. But like that was really difficult. That definitely required deep thought. And then the students had to explain why they paired them together. So that was one of them that I had used. But I know that there were a lot of them out there on that website.
Yeah, at different grade levels. And I remember the students remarking themselves, how it required critical thought, that what seemed to be an easy skill they were practicing with this new kind of question about those representations, it became higher level thinking.
And some of those activities I think had 2 or 3 day lessons that surrounded that too, to to get them ready for it with entry level questions, and had follow-up practice for them to do. So yeah, that's a neat resource.
Some teachers at South do points activities where, let's say you're solving equations, and then you say, well, everyone has to do 20 points, and maybe some of the questions are worth 5 points. So you'd have to do 4 of those, or maybe some of the questions are worth 2 points, so you'd have to do 10 of those. Or maybe you specify like you have to do at least one of this kind of question or one of this, so you can customize it, but gives them some choice.
I haven't done that before. I like that idea. It's even kind of nice for differentiating that you could even direct some kids towards the 5-point questions that maybe don't need to do the easier ones.
Mm-hmm.
Well, okay. So the link that Darcy had sent out, I'm not sure with our small group if we feel like we want to add to that, but I wasn't sure how big of a crowd we were going to have tonight. But on that Google document, I had put a link to today's slideshow, and then also if anybody had a method that they had wanted to that we either talked about or that you wanted to add to the list, that you could just give a brief description. And then if you were comfortable, and if you're not, that's fine. If you had wanted to share your email, just in case somebody was like, oh my gosh, I want to ask Heather more about the point system or activity or something like that, that you had a resource person to reach out to for that. Yeah, again, that's something that if you wanted to do after that, we can have that available and in the record here. And so just some ending notes with this, just to, remember to, if there's a game that you like, to maybe not do 40 different games, but maybe repeat them periodically just to establish the routine, so the students know what to expect. And that students definitely can get more competitive and enjoying playing games that they know the rules for, but not to do it so much that it's not engaging because it became too routine. Hype it up. I know that when I tell my kids that it's game day tomorrow, that they're definitely excited for that. If there's something that you're kind of maybe nervous to try or want to have a buddy to do it with, maybe try to encourage your teacher team, like try to get all your Algebra 2 teachers or Algebra 1 teachers all do it together and see how they implemented it, and talk about later in your PLC group what worked and what didn't. But if you're doing something like a murder mystery, to remember to try to keep the answer secret, or to vary them in some way, so that way it's the answer doesn't get out. That can be tricky with the escape rooms too, just to make sure nobody's giving secret advice during the day. You'll want to think about if you do something competitive like the hot seat, to decide ahead of time if you are going to have a prize or not have a prize, or decide what is winning, just to be ready for that, because sometimes I think we're so worried about the routine and how we're going to group kids that maybe we forget about what the prize would be. But yeah, thank you everybody for the great ideas and participating. That the week before school starts, and maybe you're starting to feel like this kid here, like, oh my gosh, I have to get up and get ready for work soon enough. I don't know, I felt like that this week anyway. And so if you want the link to today's presentation, that there's that tiny URL there, or if you want to scan it on your device, at the QR codes there. But does anybody have any questions or comments at the end?
Well, this has been really helpful, and I would love to see these all compiled, in the Google Doc. So appreciate that thought. Thanks so much, Sarah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks everybody for joining me tonight, and
Thanks,
best
Sarah.
wishes.
You too. Happy start, everyone.
Yes.